when you're building your React application, you don't want to have a single component that has every single element of your application. You want to think about all of those modular pieces that when put together, they can form your application. So when we go back and look at our previous code, we see that we had a section that was basically your header of your website. There was a section for the toolbar, and there was the unnumbered list, which contained all the task items that we have. So let's go ahead and try to recreate that in React. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll go into my source and I'll create a whole new file. I'll call this my header.jsx. And what I'll do here is basically create my header function or my header component. In React, components are basically functions that return JSX code. So I'll go ahead and copy that header component from here. And we'll return that in this function. As we mentioned, in JSX, your function can only return one parent component or one component that could contain other stuff. So if we were to return these two items here, the H1 and the paragraph, we'll need to wrap them in a fragment. And here we go. Now this here is complaining about not knowing what is getGreeting based on time function is. So I'll go back to my other file and copy this function from there because that's where it's going to be used. I'll just put it at the bottom here. Also, this is here is complaining because it says it's declared, but it's never being used. One of the ways we could use this is by basically exporting it. Now that we have this function exported, I can go back to my app.jsx and I'll import header from, and we'll provide the path to our header file. And now instead of having these two items, I'll just pass in or basically add my header component. Notice how now I can treat it as if it was some HTML tag. All I needed to do is make sure that my header is defined with an uppercase name. So it has to start with an uppercase letter. And now in my app.jsx, I'm importing that file and I'm passing it over here. Now let's see what else is missing. Looks like this function is looking for the name, and it's also looking for pending tasks count. Here's where I'm going to pass those items from the app into the header as if they were properties. So here I'll create an argument. I'll call this props. And this here is going to be props.name. And this will be props.pending task count. Right? We'll save that. I'll go back to my app.jsx, and now I need to pass these two properties or these two variables into my component here. And the way we do them is using a similar format to what we do in HTML. So here my first property name was actually called name, and the other was called pending count, which is exactly the same names as these variables here. So I'll do name equal, and now I'm going to pass the value of name, and pending tasks count equal whatever this is right here. If I save it, our application is still working fine. Everything is loading correctly. How do I know this is the one coming from my other file? Let me go back to this file and let's update this to do in React. Save this, and here we go. This header is what populates this app right here. And obviously, if we update the values here to, let's say, 5 tasks count, it will update on our application as well. Now, next, let's go ahead and create another component, and let's call it task item.jsx. Now, we've seen from our application here, this is what our list items kind of looked like. They were list items that contained this label with an input and a span. I'll copy this right now as a starting reference, and we'll go ahead and implement that into our React application. Okay, so I'll export a function. This function is going to be called task item, and it will return a list item. That list item contained a label. This input contained basically what indicates whether this should be checked or not. For now, let's just go ahead and hard code that as checked. And for our span, we had class. We need to make sure that we remember to update this to class name now that we are in React world. And here the class is basically done. I'll just put it as hard-coded value. And then over here, we pass in the text, the task.title, and that'll be it. So let me go ahead and pass in a fake task. Let me just call it that, just so we remember. So our fake task is an object that has a title, task 1, or explicit, fake task 1. It will also have an ID, and it'll have the property that signifies whether this is done or not. Make sure that I have the comma here. And now I can reference my task.title from here. We do not actually need this $sign now that we are in JSX. This is called fake task title. If we save it, well, we did not actually use it yet. So let's go ahead and switch back to my app. Down below, let me create a numbered list and let me include my task item right here. Now notice when I did this, my Visual Studio Code helped me out and it detected that I do have that component in another file and it went ahead and imported it for me. If that doesn't happen for you automatically, just make sure that you include it yourself. I'll go ahead and save that. And here we go. We get our fake task number 1. The reason why they are kind of separated further away is probably from some CSS that I have over here. If I switch this to task align left and save, now everything gets aligned to the left. Okay, let me switch back to my task item here and let's see what else can we fix here. Now we have it automatically set to be checked. Now this needs to be driven by the fact of, is the fake task done true or not? If it is, which in our case here it is, we'll make sure that it's checked. Otherwise, if I change this to false, it will uncheck that box for me. And then finally, the class name here, I'll replace this with an expression. So basically it will check if the task done is true. Actually, in that case, I do not need my double quotes. So if the task done is true, then add done. Otherwise, nothing. This is actually called fake task and save. Now, if I open my inspector and look at this element here, it has the property class, but it has no value because that's what we set it to. However, if I change this to true, we get this to be checked and we add the class name as done. All right, so let's make this a real task rather than a fake task. Let's do the same thing where we're going to be passing that fake task as a property. I'll go ahead and extract this all together from here. And instead of fake task being set on this item or on this component, we're going to pass it as a prop from the parent component. So now let's actually go ahead and name them task rather than fake task at this point. I'll go back to my app and where I added my task item, let's include task equal, and I'll just pass in that object as is. We have 2 curly brackets here. The first one is to initiate the expression side of that allows you to add JavaScript into your UI. And the other one is actually the object itself. Fix the indentation. And if I save this, here we go. My fake task is being populated. If I update this to fake task 2, it updates on my UI as well. Now, here's the thing. When we are on the task item, we had to reference the task out of the props property here. Now, we could do object destructuring by basically putting the curly brackets here, and we can extract the property name that we want to use in our element here or in our component here. So now I can just reference them all by just task rather than task dot or props dot task. We can do the same thing if I switch over to my header section. Instead of getting the name and the pending task count out of my props property here, let me go ahead and copy these two names, and I'll do destructuring and paste that in here. We have two props, one called name, the other is called pending task count. And in that case, I can get rid of props dot. These two variable names are going to come from destructuring the props object that was supposed to be there, but now we're populating them in a much shorter kind of format. I'll go ahead and save. Everything should remain as is. If I go back to my app, I can actually duplicate this task item so I can have multiple tasks here. So let's say this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3, and let's make them all not complete. Here we go. So I'm able to reuse this component multiple times in my application. And that's kind of the key for why we're doing this modularization of our code, of extracting elements that are common or repeatable in separate components. That way we're able to use them and reuse them as we need to. Now, we had another feature in our previous application that when one of the tasks was set to done, not only were we updating the checked property and we were adding the done class, we were actually updating some styles. So let me go back to my other application. I'll go into the style.css and let's copy this style or this definition from there. I'll switch back to the application or to the React application. And you notice one of the things we're doing in our app is that we're actually importing a CSS file. So I could go to that app.css and I can add my new class here. And if I hit save, you notice how those styles were carried over into our application. So every time when one of those are being checked, technically I did not add the functionality in React yet, we will be able to add those styles automatically as well. If we want, we could also pass all of those items here into our tasks, not by the full task as an object, but we can separate them into title and done properties. But in that case, we're going to have to go back and update our components. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'll cut this and let's also pass in an ID because we're probably going to be using it. If I switch over here, I'm now not expecting task, but I'm expecting an ID, a title, and a done property. And that's what I'll be referencing in my component here. If I hit save, doesn't look like I use this ID for anything, but we remember that we added this as a property here. So let's go ahead and add it. And now I have to go back to my application because they are still expecting certain values that were not passed yet. So fake 1, and this is true. Let's delete all of those here and duplicate this line. So here's my fake 2, fake 3, and let's only make the first one as true. And here we go. My application is back to operating normally. So what we did here is that we destructured the property itself or the object itself even further by passing the ID, the title, and done properties as individual elements of the component rather than one big object called tasks. Let's go ahead and create our toolbar as well. Let me copy this from my previous application. All right, and let's create a new component. Let's call it toolbar.jsx function toolbar, and we'll just return that one div. We'll make sure that we export it, and I'll go back to my app and import it. So right before the header, I'll just go ahead and call toolbar, and that automatically includes it for me. So here we go. I have my buttons already there. The reason why they look a little bit different from what we had in the other application is because of the index.css file here. where it defines certain styles for how our buttons look like. So you can basically redesign your buttons to look however you want, which you already know that from regular CSS. We can take this even further and actually create another component, and we call it button. This button will take a label and a function that will need to be executed when we click it. And what will this return? Return is a regular button that will have the label be passed into here, and on click, we just want you to call the on click function. And now I can go over here and replace all of these buttons here with my custom button, which will have label, add, and on click will do something here. Let's say console log. Let's repeat this 2 times. This needs to be a string. This is here our filter, or what did we call it? Show done only. Let's copy that. And finally, clear completed. And remove those buttons. Let's clean up the code here and put it over multiple lines just so it's a little bit easier to read. Here's the first button. And second button. And third button. Let's actually fix the console logs for this. This is going to be a filter, and this is going to be the clear. Save it. Go back to our app. Make sure that we included the toolbar. This toolbar was not expecting any properties to be passed into it, which is fine for the time being. We're going to fix that later on. But let's go ahead and open our inspector, switch over to the console, and let's see what happens when I click on one of those buttons here. Let me refresh. Looks like we have certain errors here. So on the toolbar, line 2, we used class instead of class name. That is our first error, and we have to always remember to fix that. Hit save. Now, let's see what else is happening. Clear and refresh. You provided a checked property to a form field without an onChange handler. This is something that we're going to need to be fixing for our task items as well. So whenever you have an input, and obviously you are tracking certain behavior for when it changes, we need to add an onChange function for it. For now, let's just have this function do another console log that says checked. Clean up the code, put it over multiple lines. And here we go. Let's see what else are we getting. Refresh my screen one more time. No errors at this point. If I click on add, I get add was clicked. This gives me filter was checked or clicked, and clear was clicked. Now, as I toggle on and off any of those task items here, I'm also getting this checked console logs coming up. So in this video, we not only learned about how we can modularize our application into components, but we also learned about how we can pass data onto those components using the properties or the props. And now in the next video, we're going to learn about how we can add functionality to all of those components here and how we take this application to the finish line.